Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. I remember I mentioned this to you a few months ago, actually. I said we political scientists generally believe that totalitarian regimes rely on two things to consolidate their power. One is violence, the other one is lie. And this time we witnessed it only very recently. On May the 9th, Russia held a parade, an army parade in Moscow, commemorating their victory in the Second World War over Nazi Germany. And they held this parade. And the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, participated in this event. And he proclaimed in public, he said, 80 years ago, Russia and China fought side by side, or they battled alongside each other and defeated Japanese. Well, that's a total distortion of the history, or a whitewash of the history. Why do we say that? To anybody who has some knowledge about the history of the Second World War knows that it's not true. Because right before Japanese rendered their capitulation to the Allied nations, Soviet Union learned about it. So Stalin dispatched 1.8 million Soviet soldiers to invade China, led by Marshal Vasilevsky. And they invaded China from 4 different fronts. And the army of the Chinese Communist Party, under the protection of the Soviet army, entered into the same area, the Manchurian area, namely. And they coordinated their efforts and coordinated their movements and everything. But like I said, Japan had already surrendered. So there was no battle between the Japanese army and the Soviet or even the Chinese communist armies. So like I said, it was not true. Well, this is a very complicated story. When I taught in college, I have to spend weeks and after weeks to discuss it. So this time I have to condense the history and make it very short and just cover the main points. So that leads to several questions. The first question is that was there a cooperation between Russia, between the Soviet army and Chinese army to fight together against Japanese? Yes, but it was not the Chinese Communist Party. It was not the army of the Chinese Communist Party. By 1937, the Soviet Union did dispatch their air force to come to China and to help China out. Because Japan was so strong and China was relatively weak, so Stalin, Soviet Union, Stalin was afraid that China may capitulate too fast so that Japanese could utilize Chinese resources to invade Russia. So they're using China as a buffer zone and use China to defend Japanese invasion for them. So that's why they sent in the Air Force. They fought for several years and they died and buried in China. The assistance from Russia stopped in early 1941. So it was a fact that the Chinese soldiers or Chinese army did fight alongside with Soviet army against Japanese invasion, but it was not the army from Chinese Communist Party. The reason Xi Jinping said that is because he wants to distort history and to make them look good, to cover up their dirty past. So that was the first question. So that is to say that the army of the Chinese Communist Party did not fight the Japanese at that time. So if they did not fight the Japanese at that time, so what did they do? And that leads to the second question. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party at that time, who vividly instructed his followers. He said that this war between China and Japan is an excellent opportunity for us, for our party, for our Chinese Communist Party to develop. And that's the best chance, that's a window of opportunity for us. So our decision for this war is we use 10% of our strength or of our capability to fight Japanese if necessary, and 20% of our strength to muddle through. And for the remaining 70%, we use that to develop ourselves, to develop our strength and to develop our capability for future purpose, to fight a civil war, that is to say. And then by the end of the war against Japanese invasion, that is to say 8 years later, the army of the Chinese Communist Party developed from 30,000 to 1.2 million, plus 2.5 million of militia. So they're about 4 million strong. And in comparison with the nationalist army, the government's army is like 1 to 1 or 1 to 1.1, so almost equal. And in addition, they controlled or even occupied pockets of territory all over northern China, from east to west. According to their official record of the Chinese Communist Party, they control 19 such pockets. And in those pockets of territory, they can actually rule the population. That is to say, they can recruit armies from this population. They can collect tax. They could collect grain and food, and they can even draft workers to work for them, to transport ammunition, to transport logistical supplies, and to build the sites for the war. So they could actually do that. And remember, there was about a quarter of the total Chinese population under their control. And that's what happened to them in those 8 years. And again, in addition, they not only did those things, they even ambushed the nationalist army. The nationalist army was fighting the Japanese against Japanese invasion at the time. So they often ambushed the nationalist army from behind. When the nationalist army was fighting Japanese, facing the Japanese, and they got shot from the back. It happened so many times. And in addition, so that's a long story. Like I said, I have to make it short. And in addition, the Chinese Communist Party, or the Chinese Communists, infiltrated the nationalist army and infiltrated the government. Not only they steal information or intelligence from the government or from the army, and then convey it to the Japanese army so that the Japanese army can easily attack the nationalist army on different fronts. So it is really absurd, and it's really heartbreaking to talk about this part of history. That was a very brief answer to the second question. And thirdly, after Japan's capitulation in 1945, Soviet Union did upgrade its cooperation with the Communist Party of China. The question is how? In order to disseminate communism and communist regimes, Soviet Union expanded in East Europe, and we all know about that part of the history. And in Asia, Soviet Union, or the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, also upgraded its assistance to the Communist Party in Asia. For instance, they offered great help to the Communist Party in Korea and in Japan and Vietnam, and of course, China is the main target, the focal point of their effort in Asia. We mentioned that the Soviet Union sent in 1.8 million soldiers into China. They literally occupied almost the entire Manchurian area, or Manchuria, prevented the army of the nationalist government to recover Manchuria, and then giving the land, the territory, an army, and even some soldiers to the Chinese Communist Party, who came in, like I said, under the protection of the Soviet Union, or of the Soviet Army. Altogether, the Chinese Communist Party sent in about 1.3 million people into Manchuria, basically barehandedly. So Soviet Union handed over territory, equipments, army, and personnel to the Chinese Communists. According to the declassified documents on the Soviet side, actually from Moscow, the archive center, they said altogether they gave the Chinese Communist Party more than 1 million rifles and 14,000 machine guns, 4,000 cannons, there's more to come, and 600 tanks, and 860 airplanes, jet fighters and bombers, and 2,500 automobiles, and 679 arsenals, and several munitions factories. Alongside, they also provide some engineers and well-trained technicians so that they can use these equipments and supplies. In addition, Soviet Union captured many Japanese soldiers. They're well-trained and they had actual battle experience, Japanese soldiers. So they gave these Japanese soldiers to the Chinese Communist Party, and they wore the uniform of the Chinese Communist Party's the uniform, and they joined their force to fight the nationalist government soldiers, so to ignite the Civil War. And in addition, they gave 100 Korean soldiers to the Chinese Communist Party, and they gave the Japanese weapons and even the American weapons. So you might wonder that how could the Soviet Union have some American-made weapons? That's because of the Lee's Act enacted in 1941, because they want to fight Nazi Germany side by side or alongside with each other. So there was a such agreement between the two. That's how the Soviet Union get their hands to the American-made weapons. According to their record, they gave at least 1,000 big caliber or large caliber American-made cannons to Chinese Communist Party. So alongside with a good number of, how shall I call it, the Soviet military advisors, technicians, and so on and so forth, led by a two-star general by the name of Kovalyov. So that's a very famous story. So to sum it up, in a period of 4 years, from 1945 to 1949, the Soviet Union offered great assistance to the Chinese Communist Party. They gave them territory, weapons, equipment, logistics, and even army, a very strong army. So that's why they could win the Civil War in those 4 years. And by now that you know what I'm talking about. That's why I said that it's what Xi Jinping said when China and Russia were fighting against Japanese invasion side by side and things like that. It's a total distortion of history. The reason for that is, like I said, totalitarian regimes rely on two things to consolidate their power: violence and lie, and this is lie. So they try to usurp the discourse of the past history of who actually fought the war against Japanese invasion in China. The reason they want to do that is also they want to disparage the legitimacy of Republic of China, the legitimate regime now living on Taiwan. So this is a battle of discourse. I just want to use this opportunity to clarify truth and to rectify the history of 1945 to 1949, which has long been distorted by the Chinese Communist Party. And like I said, this is actually a very long and very complicated story. I have to condense it. I have to make it short so that you could at least get the gist of it. And I think that's all I want to share with you today. And there's more to come when necessary. And I hope you like it. Don't forget to subscribe to our program if you haven't done so, and share it with your friends and click the icon bell. I'll see you next time then.